Morning, Torah lovers. Welcome to the last live stream that I have planned in honor of the memory of Lea Andersen, who passed recently. And to a group of us are collectively learning the entire Mishnah. And yeah, I committed to learning the first two prakim of Mishna D'mai, and this is the last Mishnah of the second parak. So, Leilui Nishmata, let's get started with a little bit of Chazara. Okay, so yesterday's Mishnah was all about different specific kinds of merchants or retailers who were able to treat the produce that they sell. They wouldn't, if they get D'mai produce, the rules of D'mai being a little different. So bakers who are chaverim. If you don't remember what a chaver is, you can look 2 videos before. Bakers who are chaverim are not required to take any tithes from D'mai produce except for Trumat Maaser, which is about 1/100th, and Challah from the dough, which is about 1/48th. Shopkeepers, chenvanim, are not allowed to sell D'mai, but anyone who is a wholesaler is allowed to sell D'mai, and Dr. Joshua Culp explains this because a wholesaler would just add in a little bit extra so that the person who buys it can take out D'mai for themselves. It's kind of like a reverse tax. And then they define some examples of who are people who deal in large quantities. These are wholesalers and people who deal in produce. So it's important to understand that Mishnah pretty well to understand today's Mishnah, because today's Mishnah is all about the concept raised in the previous Mishnah of Midah Gasa, of large quantities. So we're going to get Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Meir Omer, Et shadar ko lihimaded begasa, umedado v'daka, tfela daka lagasa. If Rabbi Meir's opinion is that if, I'll leave this highlighted, if you have a certain kind of produce, which is normally measured in bulk, and one measures it in small quantities, what this literally says is you join the small quantity to the bulk quantity, but that means you treat the small quantity as if it's bulk, meaning you don't have to, let me just make sure I'm saying this right. It is patur milasra D'mai. You don't have to take D'mai tithes out of it to sell it. As opposed to if it were something that is normally measured in small quantities and you measure a small quantity of it for sale, then you do have to take tithes out of that set of produce. Okay. At shidarko, lihimaded bedaka, any kind of produce which is normally measured in small quantities, umadad bagasa, and you measured it in bulk, tfela gasa the daka. So it's just the converse of this. You treat it as if it is, as if you're measuring it in small quantities. Even though you're measuring it in bulk, you treat it as if it's been measured in small quantity, meaning that produce has to have had D'mai taken from it in order for you to be able to sell it. And now they define this, or Rabbi Meir at least defines this. Izohi midagasa. Well, there's two answers. B'yavish shloshet kabin. When you're dealing with dry produce, dry goods, it's 3 kabin, which is about 3 liters. Velach dinar. And with wet or moist produce, it's a dinar's worth of produce. Yeah, it's a dinar's worth of produce. So, can do a little chart. I'm getting very into the charts. Okay. Mida gasa beyavish velach. And then we've got the mida herself. Okay, so Izohi mida gasa beyavish. 3 liters. Oh my gosh. 3 liters. And belach, 1 dinar. And if we look in Frank's Practical Talmud Dictionary in the back, it will tell us how much a dinar is worth. How much a dinar is worth. I've been working on my vocal feminization on lightness and oh my gosh, what is it called? Thickness versus thinness. So instead of saying, I don't even remember what I said, but I said like, how much is it worth? Instead of saying, how much is it worth? I'm trying to say a little thinner. How much is it worth? Anyway, how much is it worth? Length, area, volume, coins. Coin. Anyone remember that Scooby-Doo episode? Okay, a dinar kasef. This is actually not that helpful. Silver dinar is like about 1/10 of an ounce of silver. A gold dinar is about 3 ounces of silver. How much is 3 ounces of silver worth? Let's find out. The chat's gonna go away for a second. How much is 3 ounces of silver worth? CalculateMe.com says $56. How much is 1/10 worth? $2. So, okay. So depending on whether this is a gold or a silver dinar, let me write this in Hebrew and then insert below. This is about 3 liters, and this is either 56 US dollars or $2 US. Depending on whether this dinar is gold or silver. It seems to me like, I mean, if we're going to use the word bulk, $56 worth of moist produce seems more in the realm of bulk to me. But 3 liters does not seem like that much produce. So maybe it's more like $2 today. I mean, I guess also it's possible that silver is worth more back then. But Dr. Culp also says that like these are not very large values. Okay, we're gonna get a ukimta on this general rule, which is like here's some kind of like exceptions. Rabbi Yossi says, Salei Tnaim, Salei Anavim, V'kupot Shel Yarak, Kol Zman Shehu Mochran Achsara Patur. Okay, here we go. Rabbi Yossi says, baskets of figs and baskets of grapes and baskets of vegetables, anytime that you sell them, this word means sell them with achsara, is like sell them without like measuring, without taking a measure, just like eyeballing. Anytime you eyeball produce, um, um, yeah, anytime you sell this produce without measuring, you're just like in a lump. Here's a basket of figs. Um, then that produce is patur, meaning patur mi ma'asar d'mai. It's exempt from the seller having to take tithes out of it if it's my produce. And I assume that's because this is similar to selling in bulk. You're just like, oh, it's a basket of figs. Take this basket of figs for like whatever, however much money. You're not going to count out the figs or weigh the figs. You're just going to get as many as you can in this basket, and that's going to be approximately however much, and then you're going to sell it kind of like by the basket, which is kind of like selling by bulk. And that is the end of this parak of Mishnah. What's interesting about this? What questions does this raise? I mean, this whole Mishnah that we just learned is kind of a subset of this Mishnah from yesterday, where we're like, how do the rules of D'mai function when it comes to merchants, people who are not growing the produce themselves, but are like wholesalers or retailers who are buying produce from Amei Haaretz in order to then sell it to other people, which is different from just an Am Haaretz farmer who's selling their produce. They're definitely like, from our point of view, they are obligated to tithe, to take ma'asot from their produce. But we just don't really trust that they will, but they're still obligated. And it's also different from someone who, so in that sense, they're kind of a unique seller. They're also a unique buyer, because if I'm going to go buy my produce from a farm, then it's definitely from an Am Haaretz farm. It's definitely on me to take the d'mai, the doubtful maaser, from the produce that I buy, because I'm buying it to eat it myself. But if one of these merchants is not buying the produce to eat it themselves, I mean, whatever they buy that they intend to eat themselves, they would have to tithe like anybody else because of d'mai. But in general, it's the responsibility of the person who grows and harvests the produce to tithe it. We just don't trust, or we like have reason to believe that most people were not actually doing the full maaser, all the full maaserot. So when we buy it, we should just take the maaser out of it for ourselves, just to be sure that it's okay to eat by Torah law. But if you're buying it not to eat, but to sell it again to someone who's going to eat it, then you're in a kind of, this is another middle position that it's important for the rabbis to clarify how does it function. Because you are buying it, but you're also not buying it to eat it, you're buying it to sell it. But to what extent are you then responsible? To what extent are you responsible for making sure the produce you're selling is in good edible condition before it gets into the hands of the person who's actually going to eat it? And it seems to be like, well, bakers, we want bakers to be in business, so we're going to be a little lenient on them. They're not obligated at all. And they're also not selling raw produce. Unlike these retailers and wholesalers who are selling raw produce. Well, retailers are not allowed to sell D'mai because you don't buy enough. Like, if I go to the grocery store and I buy like one bunch of carrots, it's unreasonable to expect me to take 22% of those carrots and like give them to the temple and stuff, because then I'll barely have any carrots left. If I started with 5 carrots, I'd end up with 4 carrots. That's not really a reasonable thing to expect me to take like 1 carrot and like send it off to the temple or like set it aside for the holidays. But if I'm wholesaling, if I'm buying from a wholesaler and I buy like 200 pounds of rice, it is reasonable for me to expect me and for me to like find it meaningful to take like 10% or so of that 200 pounds of rice, like 20 pounds of rice, and set that aside for the holidays. That's a meaningful amount of rice. Meaning that like that's why wholesalers are allowed to sell D'mai produce that has not been tithed already, because it's just on the one hand it's enough, you're buying enough, I'm buying enough that it makes sense for me to be able and expected to take a tithe from what I buy, whereas the retailer maybe buys wholesale but sells in midah daka, sells in small quantity, and it's just not reasonable to expect someone who's buying small, like weekly quantities of food to be taking like 10% of that food and setting it aside. It's not enough. It's going to discourage business. It's just not going to work. And then there's like, well, if we generally treat this kind of, if in general one buys rice in bulk, or like one measures out rice to be sold in bulk, then even if you get like, 5 pounds of rice, you should, or like 1 pound of rice, you should still take the tithe from it, because there's just an assumption that rice in general is not gonna be tithed when you buy it. So even if you're buying a small quantity, you can assume that the person who's selling it to you did not tithe it already, and therefore you need to tithe it. So we're just taking into it, Rabbi Meir is just taking into account circumstantial evidence. And again, like a large quantity is not actually that much. It's not 200 pounds of rice. It's 3 liters of rice, which is, again, not so much, which I don't know what to make of that. Maybe people were eating less. Maybe people were buying less. Maybe Rabbi Meir just wanted to be like kind of strict about what counts as midah gasa. And then Rabbi Yossi is like, well, any kind of like vegetables that you sell in a basket, you just fill up baskets of vegetables and you sell them. That's basically the same as midah gasa. That's basically the same as bulk. Okay, so that's this Mishnah. With that, I have now exposed myself and anyone who is watching to the first two prakim of Mishna D'mai. I don't think I'm done quite yet. I think on Sunday, maybe around 10 o'clock, on Sundays in 2 days, I will go back and look at both prakim as a whole and try to see if I can learn anything about the structure, the like overall way these Mishnayot are being put together. And in general, so that'll I think be the last one that I do for Leah's Shloshim. But if you are interested in this and have found it exciting and want me to do more, let me know in the comments. I'm totally up for continuing with Mishna D'mai or for learning more other Mishnayot. Like, really, let me know in the comments. And if you want it to happen, I will keep doing this because I'm having a lot of fun and I'm learning a lot. So, yeah, we will see what the people say. But for now, this learning has been Leilui Nishmat Lea Yocheved Bat Avraham Basara. And in general, the learning that happens on this channel is sponsored in memory of these beloved Neshamot via Patreon. Okay, good Shabbos, everyone. I will see you all on Sunday for kind of a wrap-up and review of the first two prakim